too much time on different formats and changing. I just want to hear from you. So what we're going to do is I'm going to ask a series of questions and have each one of you answer it. Then I would like to open the floor up for what time we have for some questions where people can ask on specific issues or whatever you like. And then I want to do a closing statement for each of you, just a summing up. This is the sort of your final opportunity to get yourself and your expression and your communication to us as you want us to see you. So your statements are, we're going to time them, and they're going to be 2 minutes. 2 minutes. So you will have 2 minutes for each question, each of you to answer.
I think we have a timer.
And we have our stalwart timer. She times all of our
30
forums.
seconds, 10 seconds.
So all of you can see that. All of you can see that. She's going to hold up these. She'll be timing, so you see the 30-second, 10-second time. And we're going to try to hold fast to those time frames. So again, welcome everybody to the West Seattle Democratic Women's 34th Legislative District State Senate Candidate Forum. And we have a lot of things to talk about today, so I'm going to jump right in. The question put to all of you is, because some of us are here today, meeting you for the first time, eager to know why you deserve our votes, please tell us about yourself and the top issues that are most important to you. And since I started from this side, I'll start with you, Shannon. Come on down, we'll do one at a time.
Great. Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Shannon Braddock. I'm really proud to be a candidate for the 34th District State Senate seat. I think we all know that there are some big shoes to fill in Sharon Nelson. We have a great legislative coalition for this district, and I'm eager to join them in their work that they do at the Senate. So a little about me and what's compelled me to be in public service. I come from a family that's been committed to public service for many, many years. My dad was an active military person, served in the Peace Corps, was actually in 1993 around spearheaded the first initiative for single-payer health care. So I come from a family and an environment that has always encouraged community and public service. My mother is retired, volunteers for Whatcom County Hospice, always worked part-time and volunteered my whole life. So I've always been compelled by this kind of work. I have 3 kids. They are all in Seattle Public Schools, except for the one that just graduated last week. So super proud of that. He is gay. I have a middle son who is going into 8th grade. I have a daughter who is adopted from Korea. And I will say that one of the things that compelled me to run is the fears that she is expressing under this Trump administration. And we have a lot of conversations about that in my home and the things that we can do and the ways that we can address that. And this was one of the ways. And when I talked with her about the possibility of running for office, she was giddy about the idea. Because to her, seeing women run, I think obviously being that I'm her mother and she's biased, seeing me run gives her hope. She already talks about wanting to run for Secretary of State because I'm still explaining to her how all that works. So anyway, those are just the things that really do compel me to be in this work. I've worked for the past 8 years at King County, for 6 years as Joe McDermott's Chief of Staff, for 2 years for Dow Constantine. I'm currently his Deputy Chief of Staff. I've been really proud to be involved in things like the Best Starts for Kids levy, preventing 3,000 kids from going into homelessness. We've got a lot of great programs at the county, and I want to bring that perspective and that experience to the state senate. Thank you.
Go ahead, Joe.
Hi, I'm Joe Nguyen. So my parents were actually refugees from Vietnam, and they came to America because they were fleeing an oppressive regime. And unlike today, our leaders back then knew that immigrants were what made America great. So the reason why we came to White Center in the first place is because we had access to public housing. And that's why I care so much about the community and the affordability issues, because we personally benefited from that. So later on in life, my father, we actually moved to Burien, and my father got into a car accident. So that left him quadriplegic, and because of that, we experienced a healthcare crisis that basically decimated my family finances. My siblings and I had all get jobs. I was a janitor at my high school to help make ends meet in order to make sure that our family got a chance to thrive. And you look at the lived experiences that gave me, that's why I care so much about having healthcare for all, is because we experienced firsthand the hardships that happen when you go through something like that, even when it's not your fault. My siblings and I all went to public schools, so I'm actually a product of the Highline Public Schools. I went to Hazel Valley Elementary. ended up going to Kennedy High School for some reason. They redistricted the areas. So I'm born and raised in this area. My family and friends are in this community. So when we go door knocking out in White Center and Beer and even in West Seattle where I live now, oftentimes we actually visit family and friends that I've known my entire life. So when we look at this campaign and we look at this race, the idea is these are my family and friends. This community is where I was born and raised, and I will be a relentless advocate for everybody in all communities in this area. I'm actually a senior manager at Microsoft. My background is strategy and analytics, but I spend a lot of my time in the community doing things on family homelessness, police accountability, and also on affordability issues as well. So thank you so much for the time and the appreciation for being here, and I have 10 seconds left. So thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sophia Aragon. I reside in Burien, but I've also lived in Luna Park area of West Seattle. So I've lived there for about 2 years and here in about 3 years now. And, I'm a first-generation immigrant, and I had no idea that I would even land in politics. I think about when we were coming here, my parents came because Marcos imposed martial law when I was born in 1972. But I'm able to sit here today because of the opportunities that were available to me growing up in the Seattle area. My parents' plan was very simple. They were going to get jobs. My sister and I would go to public schools, and we made it to in their mind, the mother of public schools, the University of Washington, and we would find stability there. And also, when you're an immigrant family, you pretty much leave your privileges behind. My father is a physician, my mother is a nurse, and that sounds really great, except that when you come here, you need to start all over again, and they were already mid-career professionals. However, my grandmother lived with us. She was the primary caretaker. She also left her sewing shop in the Philippines when she decided to move in with us, and she worked in a sewing factory in the Rainier Valley. My mother was a nursing assistant. She stayed that way most of her life, and together they were able to cobble enough money to buy a 4-bedroom home in the Rainier Valley in 2 years after we moved here, just in time for my sister to be born. And can you imagine someone doing that today? No. So fast forward, I became a nurse like my mother. I became very interested in advocacy. That propelled me to go to law school. I took those skills to Olympia, where I had the privilege to work on full implementation of the Affordable Care Act. I was a member of the United Labor Lobby to protect workers' rights, and I also started a lobbying group to protect immigrant rights. So thank you much. I have 10 seconds, and I will say that being a state senator and being in the legislature also is a job, as you all know, and so I believe my time there would serve as a position. Thank you.
Morning, good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Len Charleston. I was born and raised here in Seattle. I've lived in West Seattle for about 21 years. We have 2 little guys in public schools, one at Madison Junior High, the other one's at West Seattle High. I'm a IAM steward for about 20 years. I've been at Boeing for about 30 years. I'm a former United States Marine, which is why I take exception with the gun laws that we have right now. And I don't believe civilians should have assault weapons because it takes an insane amount of training to actually operate those. Those in the military know exactly what kind of training that is. I've also been a pastor in Seattle for about 16 years. Currently now, I'm a co-founder of a consulting ministry, and I currently work as a volunteer chaplain for the Seattle Police Department. So you don't want to see me knocking on your door. I was also a soccer coach here for quite a while with West Seattle Soccer Club, which was a fun run. I've always been an advocate for people. At Boeing, we advocated for people of color to get better jobs and to stop the discrimination there. As a steward, I advocated for everybody that possible, not just because there's a DFR clause, but because a lot of people get overwhelmed by management, what management said they think they have to do, and so many of us are just completely blind to our rights and how many rights we actually have. So as a steward, I actually did a lot of that every day. My father was a steward, and my great uncle was a steward. My mother and father were both Teamsters, so I come from a strong union background. So my goal is to take the experiences I've had over the past 30 years working with people, treating people like I would like to be treated, or treating people better than I would like to be treated, and to take that experience to Olympia. Because I went down to Olympia fighting for rights for I-200, and when I got back, things changed. So I hope West Hill Olympia. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. So my next question is, again, it's about you. This is about Sharon Nelson, who we know is about to retire. The big shoes to fill, one of you mentioned that. We have always felt that Sharon Nelson, being the 34th, felt that Sharon Nelson is a real leader. She not only talks about leadership, but she really walks the walk. She demonstrates leadership. She gets out in front on issues. She is not a follower. She really has put herself out as a leader. So in anticipation that her successor is also a strong leader, how do you define leadership personally? And how will you demonstrate leadership in the Senate if elected? And I want to go ahead and start with, I'm going to start with Joe, and then we're going to go to Shannon, and then around to Len. Does that make sense? I just want to shake it up.
Thank you. So, to me, leadership isn't what an individual can accomplish. It's how they can support and empower the people around them to succeed as well. And that's why we need a leader who can represent all of the community in the 34th, is because we need to have people who have the shared values and lived experiences of the people in the 34th to be able to uplift that experience. I think that was one of the main questions. What was the other one? Did you have?
How do you define leadership, and how will you demonstrate leadership in the Senate if elected?
Yeah, so one of the things, at least when you talk to people in the White Center Beer communities, oftentimes folks will come in and they'll have an idea of how to make their lives better. The problem is they didn't spend any time listening to people who are already there doing the amazing work. So to me, being a good leader means actually being a good listener and being able to understand the issues and the problems that people already have there, and being mindful of who is already doing the work so that you can support their efforts, and so that we're not necessarily imposing kind of our own values on people who may or may not necessarily agree.
Great. Shannon?
Yeah, I believe that good leadership is about harnessing the power of the people around you, the knowledge of the people around you, the experiences of the people around you, bringing everybody to the table to push those things forward, and then frankly, knowing how to evolve. I think the point that we don't come in with the answers, we come in with the skills to bring the knowledge and the experiences and the perspective from a wide variety of people into the room to manage to be effectively getting legislation done. And I believe that's what Sharon Nelson does well. She effectively works with people on the other side of the state. She effectively works with people who have different principles and values than she does sometimes, because she finds that sliver in that space where a goal that she needs on behalf of the 34th District can be met if they help to join us in that goal. And that is much of what working in a legislative body is about. Having worked at the King County Council, my role was, again, as I said, to be Chief of Staff for Joe McDermott. He was the budget chair for 3 years that I worked for him. The King County Council does have Republicans on that body, just like a state legislative body has. And a big part of being a leader in that budget was having me coordinate, collaborate, bring in stakeholders from the outside, work with staff, work with subject matter experts, and make sure that the things that we were proposing actually aligned with meeting the goals and the needs of what we were trying to address. So I think we have examples in our, again, I've mentioned our Best Starts for Kids levy that we put on the ballot and that passed with great numbers, as well as our Veterans, Seniors, and Human Services levy. The Veterans, Seniors, and Human Services levy used to just be a Veterans and Human Services levy, but Executive Constantine heard from people. He knew that vulnerable populations were having more trouble. He knew that the aging population, people were coming in to talk with us about other ways we needed to address some of these issues. And so we rejiggered that levy to make it more effective on behalf of our entire county. I think that's a good example of some things that we do and how we must evolve to actually move things forward.
Good. Len?
So as a clergy, I was taught by an old-fashioned bishop, born in 1911. Everything had to be done by the numbers and by the book. He always taught me, because I had individual training from him, you cannot lead where you do not follow. Any leader has to be a good follower. You have to know where you're going and how to get there. And someone has to show you how to get there. And when it's time for you to take the reins in the leadership platform, you have to be just as sure, just as understanding of
basically turned our systems upside down. Our patients didn't have insurance. And I was like, if they had a nurse at the legislature, they wouldn't do this, right? Because we know how it works. So after my law degree, I was like hot on like, okay, we're going to do this stuff. I'm going to advocate for our patients. And then you learn really what's really effective coalition building there. Because that's the truth of it all, is that not only do you work with other people who share your same values, okay, because there is power in numbers, but you really have to start building relationships or communications with people who are going to be against you on an issue. And not only just to learn where they are, but is there a place where we can meet? Is there a place where we can solve salute this question together, whatever you're working on? And also, you need perseverance. One of the big progressive pieces of legislation that may have seemed coming out of nowhere because they were just really huge, like marriage equality, that was a 30-year project, if you ask legislators. Or the DREAM Act that came out the last couple of years, the State DREAM Act, that was someone's idea 10 years ago. Okay, so you need that kind of perseverance. The thing that we need to appreciate here in the 34th is that this district is known to be progressive in that we can take a stand on really hard issues, be very clear and stick to them. So I think that's a privilege that you need to keep in mind when you're choosing who to vote for. Thank you.
Great. So everybody got to talk about leadership.
Fantastic. All right, we are going to get a little more specific now. In regards to big and bold ideas and your relationship to what you think about that. Many people in the 34th Legislative District have been looking to our leaders, like with Sharon Nelson, to take bold actions through big ideas to enable Seattleites and Washingtonians all over the state to enjoy a better quality of life. What is an example, each of you, if elected, of a big, bold idea that you would fight for to implement for the good and welfare of us all? And let's see, let's start with, I'm just going to mix this up. Len, I'm going to start with you and go down that way.
One of the boldest ideas, I think, that might be crazy by some sorts, is I would like to see everybody get the benefit of a nice home, a good school district, good street road care, fair property taxes, the things that we all miss right now. One of the ways to do that is to emulate the role that was set forth in 1919 by South Dakota. They put together and have maintained and established a state bank. That state bank keeps them out of trouble. They're doing better than the rest of the United States. They take federal money, charter their own bank, make loans out of that bank. They can do those loans from 0 to 3% interest because the payments are already coming in. That would take care of our homeless problem. The boss, the campaign manager, we had a homeless shelter yesterday, and we began to listen to how they've organized and put themselves together. Most people don't understand that homeless people would like to go from being homeless to a homeless shelter where they have tiny houses to affordable housing, and then to the housing that we all take for granted. That's the direction and that's a path. A state bank would make that entirely possible because it would reduce the debt, it would reduce the interest. It's an insult to pay interest on interest and never get anywhere. I mean, I don't know about you, but one of the things I hate, and sometimes I have two sons, so they break everything inside. I hate getting your paycheck and then half of it gone before it even hits the bank. You know where it's going. So imagine not having any of the money at all, not ever being able to get a loan, not just because you don't have the credit, but because you just can't. The banks won't loan it to you. If we have a state bank, we'll be able to handle that ourselves. That's a bold way.
Sophia? Well, I think a bold move that I would be interested in working on and passing is higher education for everyone. Well, higher education for everyone.
Okay.
Particularly community colleges. So everyone in this room knows that someone with a high school education will face a lot of inequality if they don't get additional workforce training and education. And actually, our state is actually very poised for that, in that we have 700,000 jobs coming in statewide and pretty readily because of our population boom. And this Puget Sound region actually on the work group because I'm an executive director of a nonprofit organization to address the nursing shortage, and healthcare is actually their number one priority, looking at how do we have our region fully benefit from the opportunities of those jobs. And we know that many people have challenges getting those skills to fill those positions. So that's what I would be interested in passing and implementing. Joe?
Yeah, so a lot of the things that I care about cost money. So fully funding education, healthcare for all, and then fixing affordability issues, which includes mass transit. How do we do that with our current regressive tax structure? Make it less regressive and more progressive. Right now, families under $20,000 pay about 17% of their income towards taxes. If you make over $500,000, you pay about 2%, which is not fair. So what I would like to do is take a look, and a hard look, at the way that our tax structure is structured right now. Everything from capital gains to the income tax. And also, there's about 664 tax exemptions on the books right now that add up to more than the budget is even worth. They don't expire. The sad thing is in 2011, when we had a recession in Washington State, the first things that were cut were Medicare, Human Services, TANF. The business taxes were not cut. They don't expire. I want to review those. And I applaud Lem on the state bank idea. Bob Hasegawa was one of our first early endorsers. I've literally talked to him for hours, probably more than I've even initiated about the state bank. And I fully believe in that value. $2.2 billion per year. Per year, $2.2 billion per year, Washington State sends to Wall Street, specifically U.S. Bank, right now, in interest expense. Washington State also has its own debt limit, which we might reach pretty soon. So when we talk about infrastructure projects like mass transit, infrastructure projects like providing affordable housing, it requires funding. We should be able to do that on our own with the state, and then that should be provided by a progressive tax reform.
Shannon?
Yes to that. And frankly, all of these, I think, are great, bold ideas. I think what I'm focused on in many ways, and what I think is an interesting topic we don't address enough, as a single working mom with 3 kids, it took me 7 years to get through graduate school, a 2-year program, because I did it one class at a time, because I had to do it at night, because childcare is really expensive. I want to work on a program, much like we're looking at universal access for healthcare for all. I want universal access to childcare for everybody that needs it. Because I think when you look at what one of our inequities, when it comes to income, when it comes to the ability for people to lift themselves up and out of poverty, much of it is tied down to when you have young children in your home. If you can't afford diapers, I'm a board member of Westside Baby, where we provide diapers, safety equipment, and other basics for families in need. Kids go through about 12 diapers a day. If you don't drop off a kid at daycare with at least 6 diapers, you don't get in. So we have got to start really addressing these issues with mothers, with families, I believe, to help lift them up and lift kids out, lift mothers up so that they can have careers and living wages while they are also parenting their children. We can do both. And I think that, again, I don't have all the answers to this. Christine Reeves has endorsed my campaign at the state. She is working on a child care task force. I am eager to get there, to get involved, but I think we have to address it the same way we address healthcare and really make it a priority and really talk about universal access.
All right, thanks everyone for that. We're going to move on to the topic of the environment. Governor Inslee, also a definite leader in his walking of the walk, he has put forward some bold actions that seek to incorporate more use of clean and renewable energy and regulate corporate polluters. What ideas do you have
easy example is that Washington, as you know, is really valued for its beautiful scenery, its tourism. We need to protect that. Also, the fish, right, that we have, that we capture and sell on the markets. For them to be healthy, we need to keep our waters clean. So there is really strong economic arguments to support that. And also, that means if we are able to transition well and fully into clean energy jobs, that is supporting a new economy that could really support all of our state. And across the state, I know that in rural areas, they have many other challenges in terms of growing their economy and don't have the ability like Western Washington to really support a boom. So that is something that could uplift their economy as well, is really looking at environmental protection and clean jobs. Thank you.
Joe?
Yeah, I mean, there's a great initiative right now, 631, that's being passed around. I think they're about to get enough signatures to actually present it for the ballot, which I'm 100% in support of. I actually talked to one of the people who drafted that initiative previously, because what I care about the most is, obviously, the environment is important and its immediate impacts right now, but also how do we make sure that we're equitable in terms of how that is being addressed. So the reason why I support 1631 is because they spend a significant amount of effort to make sure that that it is not regressive and that communities of color are being supported through this as well. So I'll do a little bit of a tangent in terms of why I like that initiative, not just because of the carbon tax, the ability to actually help families transition to this new economy together, and not so that way it just helps one community, not other communities. So, for instance, the initiative has provisions that allow for credits for low-income families should they need it for utilities. There's also an investment fund, about $1.3 billion, to make sure that the money being generated from the carbon tax can be distributed in a way that it impacts and helps all communities. One of the biggest things, too, is it provides supplemental training for folks who are in fossil fuel industries to transition to new ones, and it also provides job training resources as well. So we can do this. Saving the environment, working with the environment is not some esoteric thing that's kind of further down the road. It is happening now. So pollution-burdened communities are impacted, like Sophia said, and there's health ramifications associated with that. So supporting the environment is not something that we need to do down the road. It's something that is happening right now, and we need to take bold leadership to make sure that we're actually addressing it. Because this isn't something that we can't just punt down. So my kids and our families are the ones that are going to deal with the actual ramifications of our actions. So if we don't act right now, my kids and our families are the ones that are going to have to deal with it. And that's why I care about supporting the environment so much.
Yeah, I think I want to highlight, we're certainly privileged to have Governor Inslee, to have Joe Fitzgibbon as our state representative. As we all know, he has been a great environmental leader, and I would look forward to partnering with him on the Senate side to work on some strategies as we're implementing, hopefully, 1631, the initiative, and also for other bold ideas that we might have. And it's not just about working across the aisle, frankly. We have in our own party some consternations about how we should address these issues. I think, as was touched on, one of the most important aspects is the equity and social justice piece of that. My oldest child, when he was very young, had asthma, and so at 18 months old, we finally figured it out and got it under control, but we spent a great deal of time in hospitals, money on medications, we had good health care so we could address it. A lot of these communities, families in these communities who are really impacted by pollution along the Duwamish River and some of our industrial areas don't have that. And addressing these environmental impacts is a huge thing we have got to do to also address the inequities in our communities. So I also believe, having worked with King County on remediation along the Duwamish River, with companies along the Duwamish River, in partnership with the federal government, with the state, with local municipalities, I've seen how complex it is, how much it takes, how important it is to bring all of those stakeholders in, and not just the ones who have to pay into the system to help with it, but also all those folks who are impacted by the system. So I would very much look forward to being at the state to really help address issues of environmental concern statewide, but most particularly here in the 34th.
Len?
Well, when I look at a progressive society and how technology is out there to help society progress and how it affects the environment, I just look across the pond at imagine not being able to go outside because the air itself is so toxic that it's going to cause cancer 10 years down the road? They're not looking at what it's going to cause down the road. I think that policies that we could legislate that would not only work with the carbon tax like the 1631, but reward companies for coming up with technology that wouldn't pollute the air, that wouldn't pollute the water. At Boeing, we set a new standard for jet engines in aviation. I worked on the 777 for 25 years in Everett. And if you've ever heard of 777, you have to look to see it. The engines are so technologically advanced that they're not only quieter, but they're more fuel efficient. But obviously they pollute beyond limits. So if we have the ability to have our engineers make something quieter, quicker, and safer, we have the same ability to keep our environment cleaner, healthier, not just for us, but for our children. Because there are a couple things we need, no matter how beautiful it is up here, we need air to breathe. Those of us that like water to drink, we need clean water to drink. If you want to eat fish from that water, we need healthy fish. You know, in the scriptures and old church songs, there's a song that tells you that the trees are for the healing of the nation. Washington State is known as an evergreen state. We need to help keep it that way and make it better for our children coming up after us.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We are now going to talk for a little bit about healthcare, and some of you have already touched on it. It is, I'm hearing just anecdotally, but also it seems to be in the numbers that many voters, more and more across the state of Washington, eastern and western, are starting to voice a very vocal support for universal health care in the state of Washington. And so the question is, as a state senator, what kinds of actionable steps would you take, if elected to the Senate, to enact health care for all in the state of Washington? Joe, we'll start with you and we'll go all the way around.
Yeah, so Healthcare for All is a great organization that's working on this exactly right now, and it's requiring federal support along with state level support as well. So Congresswoman Jayapal has recommended a provision in the ACA that will help get national funding into Washington to help provide healthcare for all. In addition to that, there's also two pieces of legislation going through the state leg in the House and in the Senate to help fund and promote healthcare for all in Washington State. We were very, very close actually last year, and that's why we need a very bold, progressive leader who will actually fight for it. One of the points that I made earlier was about making sure that we have a progressive tax structure in order to help fund these types of endeavors. One of the things actually is, not only do we need to look at kind of more progressive sources, we also need to lower, I think, property taxes and sales taxes and get rid of B&O to make sure that the affordability issue is going to be maintained as well. So we need to generate revenue in terms of having a progressive tax structure. We need to make sure that these pieces of legislation passes in Washington State to actually fund healthcare as well.
Great. Thank you. Sharon?
Yes, so absolutely, healthcare for all is the direction that we need to go. And as a state senator, I would fully support that legislation, the legislation that was forwarded last year that didn't quite get through. I think we need to continue moving on that path. I also believe that we, particularly within healthcare, as we're taking, as I put it, bites of this apple, behavioral health is an issue we need to continue to highlight. Mental health care, how we are making sure that folks who are both in systems where they might not have health care now, but that the states should be stepping up with local municipalities to be sure we are appropriately funding opportunities for folks who have behavioral health issues. I work in Pioneer Square next to the DESC building. You can see a rapid rise in the homelessness population, and that many of the root causes are related to untreated mental illness. And we have got to start talking about that more. We've got to start talking about it on personal levels with our families, understanding what access to both providers, social workers, all of the system of healthcare are. So as we're moving forward, while I would absolutely advocate for and be a strong leader for healthcare for all in all of its pieces, I would also be somebody who wants to particularly highlight the impacts of us not appropriately funding behavioral health services, as we've seen at Western State as well. Those are issues where when we have folks transitioning out of places like Western State, they end up on our streets because they have nowhere else to go. And we have got to step up and we have got to do better for those folks that are most vulnerable in our population.
disturbing for us to be a so-called modern society with huge high-tech companies like Microsoft, Boeing, Nextel, Intel, with all this available technology, we can't help the simplest things. Mental health is scary, it's disturbing, and those poor people are at a loss. And if we can't help them, then there's something wrong with us who don't have a mental problem. I think healthcare for all is something we have to look at. I think if we understand that financing, it starts with us, in our own bank, we'd be able to drown out a lot of the pains. And in the meantime, of course, there's tons of stuff that we can do to trim here and trim there. But you can only trim so much before you're out of places to trim, before you start losing ground.
Thank you. Sophia?
Well, I'm definitely for healthcare for all. I will say that the Affordable Care Act, as monumental as it was, also pointed out that we have a ways to go with that. And so some of the things that, I'll say one learning that was interesting, and one thing that had to be done with state investment that I'm glad the state committed to was that, for example, undocumented people were not included in the benefits of the ACA. So I was one of the few advocates that were invited to talk about why that should happen, and that investment was secured and maintained, which was wonderful. And also part of the ACA was the state was to create like a model insurance benefit package. And it was really interesting to be in conversations with men and women in the room, but the men asking like, well, why should I pay for women's health care? And so it was interesting to see that awakening in this community to better understand what we're investing in, why we cover people the way we do, and why we have to keep going there. And I think for me, just the last few days have been a bit upset with the Supreme Court. I don't need to say why. I'm sure all of you have been watching that. But you know, Washington has always been a leader in women's rights, okay? And where the Supreme Court is going, we need to be extremely vigilant that at the federal level, there's going to be erosion of that. And that is where the states have the opportunity to continue women's rights, healthcare rights, keep them strong, and even have the opportunity to advance this. That's why I'm proud to get the sole endorsement of Naval Torres Washington, along with the Women's Political Caucus. Lastly, I think an economic benefit of healthcare for all is that we need more people that provide the healthcare. So it's a smart investment not only to take care of our communities, but it actually will provide economic opportunities for all our communities.
We start with you, Rachel.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, everybody, we are going to move ahead. Speaking, Sophia, you just segued me into my next question. The Supreme Court of the U.S. just dealt a major blow to labor unions in their recent decision to set it up so that union membership is now optional. If elected, how will you protect jobs and workers' rights in the state of Washington? And if you can, be as specific as you can about actionable steps that you foresee if you were the state senator, what you would be promoting. Oh, and we will start with Shannon and work all the way around.
Great, thank you. Yes, this week has been a rough week at the Supreme Court, let's not kid ourselves. I am really proud to have more labor endorsements in this campaign than any other of the candidates combined. And I believe that I have that support because labor unions have worked with me, again, in my roles at King County for the past 8 years. They've seen how we work in partnership with them to make sure we are protecting the working class and middle class jobs that they provide. Unions for women are a great opportunity to get women into different trades as well as other careers so that they can have living wages and health care benefits and retirement benefits. These are all vital to all of our quality of life. So as we're seeing these be eroded at the state level, we need to work in partnership with the unions, frankly, in some ways on marketing campaigns. The unions have been working for a couple of years now as they've seen this coming to start building their memberships, reminding people why they are members, demonstrating to them the benefits that the union brings them. And from the government level, I believe we also need to be demonstrating to all of our other unrepresented employees the advantages that they get because of those unions. Encourage and people to continue to participate in unions because it is indeed in their best interest for all of those things that I mentioned. To me, it's the reason I engaged and have engaged for so many years with the Democratic Party. I have been a member of the Democratic Party, of the 34th District Democrats. I have seen what it means to coalesce with other people with the same principles and values that I have. I volunteered with the 34th at the White Center Food Bank. I actually got connected with the West Seattle Food Bank through the 34th District Democrats because I met people there who were compelled to engage in their community in that way. So it's not just in those big, bold policy ways that we do it, but it's also in those smaller ways that we demonstrate how much a part of the fabric of the community we need to be, and we need to continue finding ways and partnering with unions to know the best strategies to get that done at the state level.
You really want to get me started on this?
Yes, please, give it to us.
So I'm a 35-year union member. I was Teamsters when I was in college. I've been IAM for 30 years. I've also been a union steward. I clearly understand the advantages of being in the union. I clearly experience it on a daily basis where I've worked for the past 30 years. The benefits of the union is the backbone and fiber of the middle class of this country. It's not taught in schools. Labor history is some of the most incredible history that you can really study. If you want to see color barriers broke down, go to your labor history. If you want to see gender barriers broke down, go to your labor history. Labor started way back in the mid-1800s with a laundry or cleaning shop down south where they included everybody. Labor unions are one of the few places that in spite of your gender, your preference, your age, your color, your religion, you can all make the same wage. I experienced that daily. I don't have to watch and let somebody tell me about it. I live it. It's disgusting that we're looking at the breakdown of our unions and our middle class as we sit here. You start hacking away very, very succinctly on the outer fringes of things labor. You know, I look at England and they wonder why we in this country don't have a labor party. But it makes up the crazy amount of our workforce. We've been organizing in South Carolina with the IAM to get the folks on the 787 program there to join our union and become labor. Because down there, if they don't like what you're doing, any manager can walk up to you and change your life. They snatch your badge off and they take the lead. How would you like to lose a $40,000 a year job for a reason you can't understand and not have a union steward or a business representative fight to get your job back? I have been able to fight to keep people from being terminated. I've been able to fight to keep people getting their jobs back, and I will intend to fight to make sure that we don't erode our labor in this state any longer.
Thank you. Sophia?
Well, you know, I'm here because of the years I spent with the Washington State Nurses Association as their governmental affairs director. It's the largest labor union for registered nurses, and it was a privilege to also work in the larger community of the United Labor Lobby. But I always go back to, you know, how did it impact really my life as a person? And I just remember my mother, who was a lifetime union member, nursing assistant. She took me with her back then when there were caucuses in her precinct. And she actually exposed me to my first political experience. So she had me in tow, and she was listening to all this. And back then it was, you know, John Kerry, Dean, and those folks running, and they were trying to convince her to vote for John Kerry because he made so much sense, right? And, you know, as me as a little kid, I was, you know, I thought, well, is there something a little bit more exciting to this guy than that? But, you know, her simple reply was like, my union says vote for Howard Dean. And so, despite all of these messages that you need to vote this way, her union took the time to educate her, asked her to go forward and represent them in her caucus and put in the vote. And that's really true. I mean, we have such a problem with voter engagement, but one of the key contributions of labor unions is being able to organize their workers to move a political agenda. And that's something that is eroding very quickly. My mother also, as a union person covered by a union, she earned the least out of myself, my sister, my father, and I. She worked the most. But I'll just remember that ultimately she was the one to help me pay for my higher education. You know, she was the one to get me here, even though her station in life wasn't what she wanted. And finally, for nurses, because we are a very heavily organized profession, they're responsible for the economic growth and power that we have among nurses. So. Joe?
Yeah, so I was raised in Marion, which is a very proud union town. My brother worked at the grocery store as part of the grocers union. My sister was a Boeing engineer, part of the union there. And my wife was a public school educator at the Highline School District, so was there for about 10 years as well. Who wasn't a union member of my family was actually my mom. So she was a seamstress that worked in basically a sweatshop in Soto. And despite working 70 to 80 hours a week, every single week, we barely made enough money to be able to put food on the table and then help my family provide. So I can see the benefits of what the union provides, and I saw the negative benefits or the negative qualities of when you don't have a union to fight for your rights. That's why we care so much, because unions are on the front lines in terms of helping working class families. In terms of what we can actually do, so if you look at national polls, millennials are actually very favorable when it comes to union memberships. Despite that, only about 10% are actually part of unions, and largely it's because there's this disconnect between what they believe is even available to them. So part of it is marketing, but also part of it is providing resources and programs to help collect millennials or to help connect millennials with union resources to pair them up. What we can also do too is a lifetime membership. So right now, there's about, on average, 7 to 8 job transitions in a person's career. If we had lifetime memberships for unions, you'd be able to show value through the duration of their career so there isn't a disruption when they move around. Another thing that we can do is basically work with what's called micro businesses. So 84% of employers in Washington State have businesses that are under 4 people. They tend to leave, it's part of the gig economy, part of other things as well. They're not able to mobilize because it's so small. So we can put together resources and a process and a plan to help micro businesses actually organize so that union memberships can be accessible by everybody.
Okay, great answers, everybody. Everyone went, yes? Yes? Yes, okay. This is still, because what Shannon mentioned, don't get us started on the Supreme Court. There were several very just awful implications that came from Justice Kennedy's impending retirement. One of which is there is now an open spot that has been promised by the president to be filled by a conservative, which means there would be a solid conservative bent on the court, which means there are several ways that women would be left very vulnerable. So this is about how women are potentially going to be affected in the near future and far future. One of which is they're talking about it, the repeal of Roe v. Wade, which is, as we know, a law that has been for decades on the books. It is, by a majority, it is supported of people in our country, a national majority. And yet, there is this possibility that it could be. There's also danger for LGBTQ folks, that they have laws that are going to affect them negatively with a conservative court. So my question here to you all today is, what are your thoughts and actions that you would take if you were elected state senator to protect the rights of women in this state? And well, let's just do the rights of women in this state right now, because that's a big issue in itself. That's 50% of our population. So let me start with Len. I'll just go all the way down.
Well, protecting the rights of women in this state is something I got into. First of all, I come from a family that, if you ever got into an argument with a family member, you're on the wrong side of something. The fingers that you understand what you're gonna do. We're watching the erosion of the fiber of our country right now. This conservative platform that they're using is destroying the stuff that makes this place so special. As a senator, I would not only fight hand tooth and nail, I would reach across the aisle and talk with those folks who think it's a better idea to go back to the past. When you start chipping away at the liberties that we have right now, you start chipping away at why we are America, what makes us different from the rest of the world. We want to put a stop to that. I talked with the minister, my initial deal was over. I got one view, they got another view, and here we go. And my campaign message was, here we go. Well, where we went was a total of love, believing love. You know, if you do everything because you want to treat people decent, treat people fair, you're going to stand up for rights even if it puts you at risk. And as a senator, and if I have to put my career at risk to make sure women got what they need, and they're being treated fairly, and they're understanding, you know, how that they, when they walk and live in a workforce, that they shouldn't be gawked at. They shouldn't be objectified. I went to a place the other day, and I saw women dressed the ways they dressed in the 70s. I said, I didn't know women still had to present themselves like this to get attention from their male counterparts. Hey, we're counterparts. That means we have to work together. We need them and they need us. And we can only work together if we understand one another and treat each other with fairness, dignity, and respect. So fighting for their rights, more than just a foregone conclusion, is going to be a fact of the matter.
I want to apologize. I forgot to start the clock. But I gave you times that I thought were right. You may have gotten more, or I'll do it. I have done it best. I just got so involved in the question.
Sophia, well, so I've already alluded to the risk of women's health rights that we are looking at. And I think as a healthcare professional, I very much understand the nuances as to why choice is so important for women. And my personal story is, when I was 21, I was diagnosed with a condition called psoriatic arthritis. The only medication available to me at that time was methotrexate, which is called a teratogen. And so at the minimum, if you were pregnant with this drug, that your child would either have a severe birth defect or die. Okay, it's like certainty. And so when you have, and if you look at that story, there's no religion in that scenario, but can you imagine if I didn't have a choice, right? If there was an event of accidental pregnancy and, you know, birth control, I used it regularly, but you know, it's not 100%, right? So, you know, the federal government is one of limited powers. So the state has such a huge opportunity to raise healthcare and women's rights to the level in which its community wants. And many times in the last few days, my friends have been very happy about being in the Washington bubble. Let's just stay in the Washington bubble. And I'm optimistic that someday things will be better at the federal level. But right here, right now, we've made a lot of progress, and we need to protect those gains that we've had. Working in the legislature for over a decade, there's these bills that keep coming up all the time that erode the rights of minors to consent to treatment, to undermine what kind of treatment that our state health insurance can pay for, right? So all of those things I would be aware of and not let them see the light of day if I was there, and make sure we're on that progressive path for women's health and women's rights.
Specifically with Roe v. Wade, I think that's why healthcare is so important in Washington State, why healthcare for all is so important, including reproductive rights. Kind of one tangent though, there's also regulation, so specifically in Washington State, there's potentially regulations where there's fake clinics where people can go to for quote unquote healthcare, which they're actually not, what they say that they are. I would probably ban those as well, so that way we only have healthcare providers who actually provide actual healthcare for women's rights. To be honest, I'd rather defer my time to women in this room to learn more about what you believe is best for.
So well played and appreciated, actually. No, really, that's great. So I don't often think anger is a super productive emotion, but I will say these are topics that make me angry. I get really angry. And I have these conversations in my household. My daughter handed me this morning to come here to the West Seattle Democratic Women her Like a Girl bracelet for me to borrow and wear for her. Women's empowerment. When it comes to women's reproductive health care issues, we have got to stand up. We have got to do anything and everything it takes to protect them and to expand them and to provide access to women who live in poverty to all of those options related to health care. I have given birth myself to 2 kids. I have had to have a D&C because of a miscarriage. I have adopted a child who was placed for adoption by her mother. All of those things have made me stronger in my conviction of pro-choice rights for women. We absolutely have got to have access to all of that spectrum of healthcare for women. I will also say, again, I've always been a big ally to the LGBTQ community. I mentioned that my son came out when he was 16, bravely, even in this bubble that we live in Seattle, because it exposes you potentially to more hate crimes. You are definitely going to be judged in other ways. We have seen what the Supreme Court has done and managed when it comes to the rights of the LGBTQ communities. One of my proudest moments at King County was when, at midnight, the executive showed up to sign marriage certificates for LGBTQ couples. I was going through a divorce at the time. I have to tell you, watching all of those folks in line together to go to be committed in a state of marriage, I didn't understand how meaningful that was for people. I really didn't. It was unbelievably moving to me. So I'm not just an ally now, I'm like a mama bear ally to this stuff now. And because it is just for our communities as a whole, again, I am a single working mother. We need to elect more women that are mothers. We need to get more women into these legislative bodies because we bring a perspective that many people forget about.
Okay, thanks everybody. We have kind of run out of time. We have lots to talk about. However, what I would like to invite, I want to do just a closing statement for each person, a final summing up, so that you can just see one more just final presentation of each of these wonderful candidates. If you have a question and you want to just run up and talk afterwards, I don't know what your all schedule is like, but if you want to stay maybe for a little while and just chat with people, there might be some questions, and I welcome you to really come up and meet these folks. They have been so generous with their time. I do want to give just a West Seattle Women round of applause. We have what I like to call a wealth of talent right up here. I mean, I really just am so impressed with everybody. You did wonderful showings of you today. So in final closing, what I would love is to start, I'm going to start with Shannon and come all the way down this way. If you could just give a final, just what is the last thing you want us to take away as we walk out this door so we do not forget you? Each one. Go ahead, Shannon, we'll move down the line.
Well, first, thank you. Thank you all for being here, for giving us this opportunity to participate. As we all know, partnership with our communities is the way anything and everything, frankly, gets done that is effective. I believe the perspective that I bring, my experience here in the 34th District, and frankly, my ability to not just talk about these super important progressive values that we all share, but to actually, I've demonstrated the ability to effectively work in a bipartisan body, political body, move forward legislation. I've seen how it all gets done. I understand how this business works, and I believe I would be a very strong and effective state senator for all of you. I'm proud to be a member of this community. I'm proud to raise my family here, and I would very much look forward to the privilege of partnering with all of you and of representing all of you in Olympia. Thank you.
Again, thank you so much for the time. I was born and raised here. My family and friends are here. I was joking earlier about the fact that I was born in White Center, lived in Burien, now in West Seattle, and I need to move to Vashon to get the rest of the district under my belt. So when I talk about fighting for the people here, I will be relentless because we're talking about my family and my friends. And that's why I care so much about this office. That's why I care much about this space, is because these are the people that have raised me, and despite our adversity growing up, gave to my family the ability to succeed and to thrive. And that's why I want to be a state senate for this community. Again, thank you so much for the time. I appreciate it. And again, what I really want is to be a voice for all communities. In the 129-year history of Washington State, despite including White Center and Burien, there has never been a legislator of color ever in the history of Washington State. We need leaders who have the same shared values and the lived experiences of every community in the 34th. Thank you so much.
Sophia.
Well, and thank you as well, and I hope you realize that running for office is a serious and very difficult endeavor. I mean, look at this, my competition. This is kind of nutty. Democratic Senate. I didn't have to talk to a Republican to get a vote for anything. And then over the years, I saw some fracturing, and then finally the Republicans did take over the Senate. And in the last few years, it was extremely discouraging because I kind of felt like a hamster on the hamster wheel. I knew what the motions were, I knew what our goals were, but we weren't going anywhere. And that's frankly why I left and took this opportunity for a leadership position in the nonprofit organization. I wanted to get away. It was a good opportunity to expand my skills. But 3, 4, 5 years later, I saw people like Sharon Nelson turn things around. But that wasn't after a lot of turmoil and a lot of losses. But with just one Democratic Senate vote to turn the majority, they got so much done in one session. And I think the senators there understand that we need to keep that momentum. The privilege of being a senator in the 34th is you can take those hard stands. We're progressive and we can stand hard for those issues. So I feel like, every other day I'm like, I'm crazy to do this, but I feel like it is a calling after what I've seen. I've been away and I'm back. So I would really love the privilege of your vote to be the next senator of the 34th.
Yeah, I would like to represent the 34th because I believe we can do a lot better than we're doing right now. I'm dissatisfied with a lot of things that I see from one end of this district to the other. You've got poverty like it's not thought of on one end, and you've got wealth on the other side. And they're both complaining about the same thing. And they're both not satisfied, not because they're greedy, it's because there's some unfair things going on in the state. I can appreciate the state as an African American because in 1933, Washington State elected its first black senator. That was a long time ago, and that's something that was pretty much unheard of all over the place. I also believe that we can do better because if I'm elected to go to Olympia as your state senator, I know I'm not going alone. I know I'm going with your thoughts, your prayers, your suggestions, everything you want a senator to be able to accomplish for you in that district. I hope to be that voice for you in the 34th. I hope that you understand that I'm sincere about doing this. I've always been a servant of the people. I probably will be so that the day I die, I'm too great to even speak. But that's what I'm intended to do, to be that voice for you,